Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's construction clinic. My name's Nina, and I'll be taking you through a quick housekeeping presentation, an introduction to the ICCP, and then we'll get into today's clinic. So on your screens, you should have a control panel. The only thing you need to be aware of is you have a hand icon that looks something similar to this. If you have any issues with audio, please just raise your hand. I'll drop you a message and see if I can help you out. And you also have a question box. So once we get to the clinic, and if you have any questions for today's presenters, feel free to send them through the question box and we'll field them across. So very briefly, an introduction to the ICCP. I see we have a lot of familiar names on the session today, so I won't dwell on things too much, as you obviously know about us already. But for those people that don't, what is the ICCP? Well, we are a professional members organisation, and we recognise those with skills, qualifications and expertise in the professional management of claim. We have three main objectives, and those are to establish international professional standards for the management of claims, to give recognition to those who have gained the appropriate knowledge and experience in the management of claims, and also to help and educate those perhaps at the start of their career who would like to gain that experience. So membership. We have three main levels of membership: associate, member and fellow. Each level comes with a certain set of prerequisites which must be met in order to join at that level. We don't have time for the detail today, but if you would like information, please visit the ICCP website. All the details are up there. You can find out how to apply and the fees. There's also concessionary fees for members residing in certain countries, which you may qualify for. So check all of that out, and if you have any questions, then just drop me an email and let me know. Last week, if anybody was on the clinic, we gave a brief nod to Claims Class. The clinics are actually run in partnership with Claims Class, who is the ICCP's accredited training partner. There's obvious synergies between the two organisations in that the ICCP recognises people with the skills and expertise to manage claims professionally, and Claims Class teaches those skills. So they have a number of courses, which you'll see on your screens there, and various ways to learn through e-courses, in-house training for companies, and they also produce regular technical articles on the topics of contracts and claims. Through Claims Class courses, depending on which course you take, there are routes to ICCP membership. So if you feel that you may not meet the requirements set out by the ICCP, there could be an alternative route for you through Claims Class courses. And to help during the COVID-19 situation, they're offering 20% savings on courses. So again, if you've got some time on your hands and you're looking to gain some skills, have a look at Claims Class. Right, so if you'd like more information, the details of the website is up on there. You can also drop me an email directly. Always happy to have a chat and answer questions and provide any information that you're looking for. Okay, so the clinic is now open, and today we've got two presenters. We have Bill Bordill from Decipher Consulting in the UK. Bill is a quantum and dispute resolution expert, and we welcome back Lee Spall, who is a planning and delay specialist. So Bill's going to kick things off for us today with some questions that we've received, and if you have any questions later, please do send them in, and please try to make them specific to their professional background so that we can answer them for you. So over to you, Bill.
Oh, hello, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Thank you, Nina. As Nina explained, I'm a quantum expert, adjudicator and party representative. I was asked to look at two specific questions, and we'll go through those first. The first question is regulation issued by government considered a change in law? Well, the simple answer to that is it depends. It depends on the jurisdiction, it depends on the contract, and it depends on the timing of the contract and the nature of the change. Unfortunately, the person writing the question didn't give me that information, so I can only say it depends. Question 2 is, does the PM qualify for compensation as a result of COVID-19? Well, unfortunately, again, it depends, and that's a common answer to questions like this. It depends again on the contract and the consequences of COVID-19. Now, this is quite an important issue because most people talk about COVID-19 giving them entitlement to make a claim, and that's not the case. It's the effects, it's the consequences of COVID-19. So just the fact that there's an illness out there doesn't necessarily mean that you've got an entitlement to make a claim. So COVID itself does not excuse time or extra money. It's the effects of COVID. Now, it depends isn't a satisfactory answer for anyone. I appreciate that. But what I'm going to do is talk through some keywords and phrases. I'm very well aware that over the last couple of weeks, Andy's run some clinics on and talking specifically about the FIDIC and the JCT contract. So I will touch on those, but that's not going to be the main thrust of today. And then if there's time at the end of what I've got to say, I'll touch on dispute resolution and how that's possibly been affected by COVID-19. Now, for those of you that are interested in FIDIC, there is a guide that's come out only this week, and in talks with Nina, she is going to put it on the web portal for our members to access. And this actually provides quite in-depth answers to the 2 questions that were just posed. Again, it can't give a specific answer because it needs more information, but it does give you a guide as to how to work out what the answer might be to suit your particular circumstances. So it would be well worth members getting in touch with that document. Okay, so looking at keywords and phrases, the first one is pandemic. Simple place to start. I guess we all know what that means, but I did look it up in the dictionary. And it means a disease which has spread across multiple continents worldwide. So just park that for now, but we will come back to that. The second phrase is COVID-19. What does that mean? Well, it stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. Now, remember that year because that is critical. Because thinking now of when people have to get their notices in under contracts and the time restraints on those, this disease has been around since 2019, which was last year. It's described as a pneumonia of unknown cause. Unknown cause could be critical. Declared as a public health emergency and international concern. So it's of international concern, it's of an unknown cause, and we first heard about it last year. We're now into April of 2020, so in most situations, notices should already have been issued some time ago. I'll just summarise a little timetable here that I've noted down from the World Health Organization. They first reported it as a pneumonia-related incident affecting the world on the 31st of the 12th, 19. They then reinforced that as international concern on the 30th of January 2020. And on the 11th of February 2020, it was named COVID-19. So somewhere between November 19 and February 2020, it went from a very serious illness in China to an international concern with actually a name of COVID-19. On the 23rd of March, the UK went into lockdown, and the UK was behind several other countries in that regard because it affected the UK later. And whilst the UK was in lockdown on the 23rd of March, the UK government then issued a note on the 31st of March encouraging construction particularly to go back to work or to stay in work, and they issued safe operating procedures. So there's some confusion there between lockdown and construction working. It's very difficult. I think a contractor who's unilaterally pulled off site may be in a difficult position. But that's just one to consider in the round. The next phrase I wanted to talk about was condition precedent. What is a condition precedent? Well, this is a clause in a contract where if you don't comply implicitly with the clause, you will lose your rights that you otherwise would have had been able to take advantage of. How do we know if a clause is a condition precedent? Well, it doesn't need to say it's a condition precedent. It just needs to satisfy a 3-point test. The 3 points of that test are, is there a definite time limit? Is there strict, unequivocal language? Is it clear to understand? Excuse me, are there clear consequences of failing to meet the time limit? That will define whether the notice provisions or any other provisions in a contract are a condition precedent. And it's relevant to go back to your contracts and look at whether you think that notice provision is a condition precedent clause and how does that fit into the COVID-19 timetable that I talked about earlier. Now I want to touch on force majeure. Andy's talked about force majeure earlier in previous webinars. Force majeure really considers a temporary suspension of work, not a permanent suspension necessarily. This is a concept from French civil law, and there's no true legal definition for what force majeure is. So we have to take guidance from previous cases and what's in the contract. Now, FIDIC used to give an example of what force majeure was in the 1999 books, but in the revised books in 2017, they dispensed with force majeure, and they called it, I think it's exceptional circumstances. I think it probably amounts to the same thing in practice. But what we're talking about is a legal or physical restraint, which was unforeseen. That is what you would encompass as a force majeure event. Now, in terms of COVID-19, we're helped a little bit by a case from 1920, so 100 years ago almost, which is Lebaupin versus Crispin. And they reference an epidemic. Now, this is helpful to COVID-19 because we established early on that COVID-19 is a pandemic. Pandemic is another level up from an epidemic. So it seems logical that a pandemic should be classed as force majeure if you have a force majeure provision in the contract and if that contract has not been amended to not suit our current circumstances. I think it's also helpful for our cause in that social distancing, social spacing, most jurisdictions are now calling for at least a 2-metre gap or space between operatives. That may be possible on construction sites, but very difficult for the entry point and the exit point of the site, particularly difficult in the welfare facilities. I think that, coupled with Lebaupin and Crispin, possibly tips the scales well in the favour of this becoming a force majeure event. However, we should all be aware of not withdrawing labour from site. That effectively is a strike, or could have been a lockout, and different provisions may cover that eventuality. Frustration is another word we should be considering at the moment. What I'm trying to do is give you some things to think about beyond what you might first think about when you read the contract. So frustration brings about the termination of the contract. Whilst COVID-19 is certainly frustrating, probably for all of us, it's not necessarily legally frustrating our contracts. To be frustrated, a contract must be physically and commercially impossible to deliver. So it's the test of impossibility. So the fact that COVID-19 places restrictions on labour, makes it more expensive or difficult to get people to site, probably draws out the length of the operations. That's all an inconvenience. That's not an impossibility. It would have to be a situation where you absolutely could not carry on. So a closing of the site by another party or something like that. Finally, perhaps you should also consider insurance. This is rarely somebody's first thoughts, but some businesses will have business interruption insurance. and their businesses will have been interrupted by this. But remember, your claim is not against COVID. Your claim will be against the actions of others. So it's likely that somebody else has closed the site and you're making a claim as a consequence of that site closure. Your claim is not about necessarily COVID-19. Okay, so those are the key words and phrases. Just to touch on the three contract, FIDIC, NEC and JCT, and this probably reiterates a fair bit of what Andy has talked about before. With FIDIC, I think you're likely to get time and money, certainly possibly get time and money. And as I said before, 1999 documents refer to the force majeure and the 2017 documents refer to exceptional events. I think it amounts to the same thing. Under the NEC, possibly likely to get time and money, clause 60.119. It sets out three tests, two are fairly simple, but the third one is, and it reads, an event so unlikely that no other contractor would have allowed for it. And this is difficult because it depends on when you priced and when you secured your contract. If you secured your contract in February 2020, but we already know there was a pandemic of international concern by December 2019, it could be argued by the other party that a competing contractor may well have priced for the eventuality of what has become COVID-19. So that makes it a bit sticky for NEC, but not impossible. It's one to bear in mind when you're framing your arguments, I think. And under the JCT, possibly only entitled to time only. That's because clause 226, it would be covered as a relevant event, but not necessarily covered under 421 as a relevant matter. To get time and money, it needs to be both a relevant event and a relevant matter. But obviously it depends on the particular circumstances of your contract. I'll miss out what I was going to say about dispute resolution and adjudication because time is moving on. But the CIR has produced a document very recently that would help anyone in terms of holding meetings over video conferencing and that sort of thing, where in an adjudication or an arbitration, it's not possible to have face-to-face meetings. And so finally, a piece of advice, and that is don't rely on your contract. Meet with the other party, if that's a virtual meeting or however, but get talking to the other party and try and come up with some agreement, some settlement of a way forward. Take away the uncertainty of what may or may not be an entitlement under the contract, because I think it's very unclear under COVID-19 how this is all going to shape up in the future. And if you can reach an agreement to some mutually satisfactory solution now, that is the best position you can get yourself into. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Lee.
Thanks, Bill. Afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's well. Just finishing off on what Bill was finishing off there with, time. If you are going to be making a claim because of the current events, before it occurred on your site, make sure you know what the status of your project was, so it doesn't get confused with what the effects of this may be to your site and what effects you'd already suffered. So make sure you get that clear. It could be harder now because you may not be on your project, but it's important to get those records and record exactly the status of your project before all this started. As Bill said, that could be quite difficult because it's 2019 it started. But the effects, I don't believe, have been felt properly until this year. And the social distancing one, maybe you've got a disruption claim. Hard to prove again, but social distancing may mean that you can't have the same workforce you were going to do a task. So it's going to be, especially in the Middle East, where you have, it's labor intensive, every job you do, you may have a disruption case. But it's worth looking at the avenues on those two, but make sure you record time, where you are and what you believe the effects are going to be. I've got two questions that I'm going to be running through. One of them is from Benjamin S. And his question is, conducting the delay analysis, it was found that the program updates contained out of sequence activities which resulted to incorrect dates. Should it be corrected and justified prior to the analysis, or can I simply reject the EOT submission? Firstly, what delay analysis method are you going to perform? If you're performing a window analysis based method, then an as planned, as built, it won't matter what the out sequencing was, because you're not looking at any forecasting or entitlement. You're looking at actual delay. So under an as planned, as built window analysis, you'll be reviewing in a window period of time what was planned, what actually happened, and how much was the critical path affected in that window. Whether the outer sequencing on the forecasting after your window shows an incorrect date, that's not the point of issue. The issue is, what was the actual data? Was it recorded correctly for that window? So that's the as planned, as built window analysis. If you're looking at a time slice or a time impact window analysis, then yes, outer sequencing may well affect the results of your analysis in every window you're looking at. So should you reject it? You need clarification. The contractor may well have changed his sequence from the original planned because he's worked out he can do it quicker, he can do it better, or he's actually trying to mitigate and he just hasn't revised the logic in the program, which is then flashing up an out sequence. So it could be one of two things why there's out sequence. And so a discussion with the contractor to say, where's this out sequence? Why is it not corrected? It's better to correct, but you can possibly still do a reasonable analysis if you take on that critical path and you have a look at that outer sequence. I've seen projects where I've got a 30,000 activity program and we go through 60-month updates and we find that every update has got out of sequence. To go back and correct that, you may not have the time permitted. So again, it's down to the agreement with your client. How much time and how much money does he want to spend? I've seen out of sequence corrected and give the same answer. So there's some tests you can do with the Primavera software that you're running. So it is important to do that. So all of that comes back to your contemporaneous record. If you're relying on your schedule update to be your accurate contemporaneous record, you have to put that time and effort and make sure that every update is correct. Also, likewise, the program for the project, the reviewing party should ask that question. You've got out of sequence. Can you correct it so we get a true reflection of what you're doing? Because if you're working that sequence, you're not working as planned. For whatever reason that could be. Delay, you haven't got the men, you haven't got the materials, something. But the logic you've put into that program was not correct because you can work out a sequence. So make sure your updates are correct. It's really important because without those, your delay analysis is wrong. And then it's going to be a very lengthy and costly exercise to recreate updates or an as-built program. So to conclude on that one for you, Benjamin, no, you shouldn't reject. You should review it, try and resolve it with a contractor. If you're using an as-planned, as-built window analysis, it doesn't matter, it won't affect your analysis. If you're using a time slice or a time impact analysis, which relies on forecasting, then yes, it will. It will affect your results, potentially affect your results. So you should check it. And then another question, it was back from 2 weeks ago. One of our regular contributors, I would imagine he's on today. It's from Simon Rowland, and he asked 3 questions, and part of it was float ownership. Who owns the float? I gave a response, and I just want to expand on that slightly because I said 2 weeks ago that I believe the project owns the float, and I still stand by that. The difference being, which I should have added, was if your contract says that somebody owns the float, then you have to follow the contract. I've only seen one contract where it declares the float is owned by the client. And I've worked on many contracts and I've only seen it once. So it's very rare. Therefore, the project owns the float as a general majority view. Some years ago, and quite some years ago, there were two arguments, two viewpoints. One was, if I'm doing a lump sum contract, then the contractor should have the float because he's taken all the risk. If it's a remeasurable contract, then the client should have the risk because he's going to pay. Guidelines for the planning, AECI and SCL, both work on the basis of it's first come, first served. So the project owns the float and whoever gets there first. AECI actually states, got it here, total float is a shared commodity and is available for consumption on a first come, first served basis. The SCL protocol, I think principle 8, isn't so obvious about it, but it works on the basis that if you want to get an EOT, the employer delay event has to reduce the total float reduce the total float to below zero to become negative, which means the project's delayed. Then you can apply. So if the employer delay event has to delay the float, then the float must be there as a common use. So whilst they're not that specific, you can imply that it is, as a guideline, that it's the first come, first served basis. But always, and Bill and everyone else, all the contract specialists will tell you, follow the contract. The contract says do it, follow it. You can't be wrong if you follow the contract. And with that, that's it from me for this week. So Nina, I'll pass back to you.
Thanks, Lee. We have had a few questions in, and I'm going to stick to be on topic and make sure that we're looking at questions that fit your backgrounds. Just to follow up on the ownership of the float, Lee, Faisal's asking, would you encourage stating float ownership in the contract?
No. I would still treat it as first come, first served.
Okay. And one more question I think we've got time for. There's a few parts, so bear with me. Another one for Lee on delay analysis from Vanessa. Is as planned, as built the best form of delay analysis for COVID-19? And is as planned, as built a form of delay analysis that shows the absorbed delay within the updated program? If yes, does it mean that we have to wait for this pandemic to finish in order to establish the delay analysis? Or can we just perform another methodology instead to make sure that we're complying with the requirements of the contract to provide the particulars after such a period of notice?
Wow, thanks, Vanessa. What a question. Okay, as planned, as built, is it the best method? No one can say what the best method is, because if there was a truly best method, everyone would be talking about it and the other methods wouldn't exist. So the best method is dependent on the information you've got. Before COVID-19, if you've got actual data, you can record what your actual delays were. So yes, you can use it to that point. If you want to still apply that method, yes, you would have to wait for the full effects to have happened to do an as planned, as built, because the as built is purely that, it's actual. If you've got to put a notice in, I would put in a forecast. So my notice is giving my client as much information as I possibly can so that he's under no illusion of what I believe the effects are going to be. And yes, so When will COVID-19 finish? Okay, crystal ball, no one knows. But you can say, well, I believe we're going to be on shutdown for the next 2 months. So in 2 months, I'm putting in that we can't carry on as normal for 2 months. And that's what my notice period is going to say, and that's the effect. So that's how I would put it forward as a notice. But again, you can then confirm that when it finishes, and you can do your as-built. Was that all the parts to the question, or was there another part to that?
No, I think that's it covered.
Yeah, okay. But thanks,
Right.
Vanessa. Very good for the end of the session.
Right, we're just 1 minute past the half an hour, and we're trying to be very strict with the time, so we'll call it an end to today's session. Any questions? We've had as usual, we've had quite a lot of questions in that relate to FIDIC and contract specific. So those will roll over to next week. Andy Hewitt will be back on next week, and he'll be able to address those for you. So make sure that you join us. Just to go back to what Bill mentioned earlier about the new FIDIC paper that's come out, that will be going up in the members area tomorrow. We've also come across some other, thank you, Bill. We've also come across some other papers. Quite a few law firms are putting out their opinion pieces at the moment. So we're trying to collate all that information, and that's going into the members area this week and next week. So if you are a member, log in, check that out. It's all there for you to download. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Bill and Lee, and we hope to see you all back at next week's clinic. The registration link will go out in the follow-up email today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.